On a recent podcast called the Game Mess Mornings, posted to the Giant Bomb YouTube channel, its host Jeff Grubb has made a pretty interesting remark regarding Creative Assembly, the studio behind the Total War series and games like Alien Isolation. He says they're going back to making RTS games and working with a big IP. Now, he doesn't say what the IP is, but let's listen to exactly what he said.
I don't want to say what brand they're working with, but I have heard Creative Assembly is going hard back into RTS, and then they will be working with a major IP in the years to come. And I'm pretty excited about it, but I'm kind of let things settle before and make sure that is 100% happening before I say what it is.
So pretty interesting stuff for a Halo Wars fan because, well, what other big IP could it be? Now, obviously they work with Warhammer, they've made an Alien game, but they've also made Halo Wars 2. Now, if anyone's going to be fanning the flames for Halo Wars 3 hype, it's going to be me. And now, forgive me if I'm looking into this too much, he did say going back to making RTS games, which is an interesting choice of words because Creative Assembly have never really stopped making RTSs. They've always made Total Warhammer, and they've just made a new Total War games. So they're currently an RTS studio. They're not going back to it. They're just sort of, I don't know, going back to a previous series, perhaps. That's kind of how I read into that. That's obviously my really charitable view on this because I really, really want this to be Halo Wars 3, but it wouldn't be entirely honest of me to say that that's exactly what I think this means, because without the context which I'm just about to provide, it could start to make a little bit more sense, because just a little while ago, Creative Assembly had to shut down one of their new games that they were making. It was an FPS game called Hyenas, and I'm not entirely sure why it was shut down, but it was a game that was playable, very, very close to coming out, but it was just cancelled for some reason. So the idea that Creative Assembly are going back to RTS could just mean that they're no longer approaching games like Hyenas, and they're just going to focus on what they consider their bread and butter and what is successful. So that could be what they mean by going back to RTS, not necessarily back to another series that they've worked on in the RTS space, just back to their roots, if you like, making RTS games, which I'm saying they never stopped. Just because they were making Hyenas doesn't mean they stopped being an RTS studio. In fact, their most recent Total War game, which is an RTS, came out this year. So they're not going back to RTS games. They always have been making them. So that's why I read into that a little more than I perhaps should have. So what this all essentially boils down to when it comes to Halo Wars 3 is we don't know. Because Jeff Grubb didn't announce exactly who they're working with, or at least wasn't sure, it's difficult to say if this is Halo Wars 3. But what I thought would be an interesting little exercise for this video is to examine some of the facts that we know about Halo Wars at the moment, and to sort of gauge whether or not Halo Wars 3 is likely based on the current climate at 343 and the Halo IP as a whole. So despite the outcome of this news, we can still take a quick look at Halo Wars 3 based on what we know from 343 and some other things which we'll get into. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is the head of 343, which since Bonnie Ross stepped down is a guy called Pierre. And from an article which they posted on Halo Waypoint in 2018, he's gone on record to say that he's a fan of RTS games, which is pretty cool because, well, Halo Wars is an RTS game and he's the head of 343. If anyone could make it happen, it's going to be him. Unfortunately, I can't actually read the article because the Halo Waypoint website was changed after the article was posted and the links to it can no longer be found. But I did find a Reddit thread where people were talking about some of the things he said, and one of the comments here quotes him, and here's the quote. I've talked a lot about how cool a Halo space combat game, tactical or strategic, could be. It's the perfect setting for something like that. Maybe one day we could make something like that. And the person who's quoting this says, give me Halo Wars 3, or give me death. Which, of course, I agree with. So that's pretty good news for Halo Wars 3 because the head of 343 himself is a fan of RTS, and he's also a fan of Halo, and he's gone on record to say that space combat would be something he's interested in, which is a good thing because some of the unreleased concept art for Halo Wars 3 that we do have access to pretty heavily implies that combat in space was one of the big things that was pitched for Halo Wars 3, but obviously never saw the light of day and hasn't been developed. So drawing these two things together, I would say, is a net positive for the potential that Halo Wars 3 could be a thing in the near future. And then on a similar sort of note here, we have an article from Games Radar, which is quoting an interview done by Giant Bomb, where Phil Spencer and Matt Booty are discussing the future of Halo. And the most interesting part about this article is that the future of Halo is in discussion at Microsoft, and it doesn't necessarily just mean Halo Infinite, because they're saying in this article he doesn't specifically say Infinite, which leaves the door open for spin-off games and things which aren't FPSs. Now, this is reading between the lines pretty aggressively, but just the fact that Microsoft are discussing Halo as a broader sort of franchise puts us in good stead for something like Halo Wars 3, although obviously not a confirmation in any way. So I'd say overall, the current climate for a potential Halo Wars 3 is pretty well as good as it's ever been. We've got people in the industry saying that Creative Assembly are working alongside another big IP to make an RTS. Microsoft and 343 are in a pretty good position for expanding the Halo universe. And we also know that Halo Wars 2 is doing pretty well because of the player numbers provided to us by Halo Warpoint. I've actually done a whole separate video on Halo Wars 2's player count, which you can check out on the card or in the description right now. So this pretty well sets the scene for a Halo Wars 3. We know Halo Wars 2 is doing well for player count. We know 343 are keen to make RTS games because their head likes them. We're pretty sure that Creative Assembly are working on something which isn't Total War. And we also know Microsoft are well aware of the Halo franchise and are thinking about its future. So all of these things combined makes me think Halo Wars 3 is quite likely. I think the scene has been set for a big return to RTS for the Halo universe, and I couldn't be more excited for that. But I do want to pass the question off to you. Based on what we've talked about today, how likely do you think Halo Wars 3 is? Because I'm actually way more optimistic based upon all of the things I've talked about in this video, but that could just be me holding out false hope because I obviously want a Halo Wars 3. I make Halo Wars 2 videos every single day. You'll have to let me know your thoughts down in the comments, but I think this is a pretty interesting time to be a Halo Wars fan and a Halo fan, of course. So please do let me know your thoughts down below. And that's going to be it for today. Thanks for watching this video on Halo Wars 3. It's the first of many, or at least I hope so.
All units. All units. And ready. Generator upgrade complete. Aye, aye. Target. All units. Eat grill, uglies. Got it. Yes, sir. Spartan out of the fight. Local units. All units. Ready to go, sir. All units. No problemo. All units. All units. Got my foot on the pedal, sir. Enemy structure destroyed. Listen to that. All units. Revved and ready. All units. Just give me an order, sir. Revved and ready. All units. Control, we have enemy forces in the area. She's ready to go, sir. One less hostile. Rally point set. All units. Our allies are in trouble. Generator constructed. All units. The enemy hero is down. All units. All units. Upgrade complete. All units. Excuse me, coming through. All units. Forge at the wheel. All units. Up and ready. Ready. Our allies are attacking the enemy base. All units. Air pad constructed. Rally point, set. All units. All units. Ready? All units. All units. Defensive aura upgrade complete. All right. All units. All units. Well done. We paid a price, but won the day.